John Carter was a simple man living on the edge of the colony world Orion 5. His house stood at the border of the human district, a quiet place where the wind carried dust from the endless plains. John had fought in wars long ago, but now he wanted peace. He was tired of canned food, tired of cooking badly for himself. So, one day he posted a job ad. It was nothing big, just a simple request. He wanted a cook, someone who could make warm meals and bring life back to his empty home. The day was calm, the sun dipping low behind the jagged mountains. John sat by the window, waiting. He expected a middle-aged woman from the colony, maybe someone experienced with Earth recipes. He expected nothing strange, nothing dramatic. But fate had other plans. The doorbell rang, sharp and clear. John rose from his chair, brushing dust from his shirt. He opened the door, and for a moment his breath caught. Standing there was not the human cook he imagined. It was a tall, thin woman with pale silver skin that shimmered in the light. Her eyes were large and violet, glowing faintly like stars. And in her arms, she carried a small child with the same eyes, hiding its face against her shoulder. John stared in silence. The woman looked nervous, her lips trembling as she spoke in broken English. "You need cook?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but carried a strange echo, like two tones speaking at once. John blinked, unsure what to say. This was not what he had planned, not what he had posted in the colony market. Yet here she was, standing on his doorstep, an alien mother with her child. The child peeked up at John, curious but afraid. Its tiny hands clutched the mother's arm tightly. John's heart skipped, because for the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest. Not fear, but something else. He looked at the woman, then at the child. He could not turn them away. "Come inside," John said slowly. The woman's eyes widened, and relief softened her face. She stepped in, the child holding tighter as they entered the small house. John closed the door, still wondering if he had lost his mind. An alien, here, in his home, answering his ad for a cook. What would the neighbors say? What would the authorities do if they found out? But deep inside, he already knew he could not let them walk away. The woman placed her child gently on a chair and stood nervously by the kitchen. She looked around at the rusty pans and dusty shelves. Her fingers brushed over the counter, and she whispered in her strange accent, "I can cook. I learn. I only ask. Please, safe here." Her eyes locked with his, and John understood. She was not just looking for a job. She was looking for protection, for shelter. Her child needed a safe place. Her trembling hands, her tired eyes told a story of fear, hunger, and long travel. John crossed his arms, studying her. She was clearly not from this colony, not even from a nearby system. Her clothes were worn, stitched many times. The child looked thin, fragile, like it had not eaten a proper meal in days. John's soldier instincts whispered danger, but his human heart whispered louder. "Sit down," he said, motioning to the table. The woman sat, holding her child close. John brought out a jug of water and poured it into 2 glasses. The child reached out eagerly, sipping with wide eyes. John watched silently, feeling an ache he had not felt in years. He had been alone too long, his house too quiet, his life too empty. The woman placed the glass down and spoke again. "My name, Lyra, this my son, Kale, no place to go." Her voice cracked at the last words. John's chest tightened. He had expected a cook, but fate had brought something very different. An alien mother and her child, desperate, alone, standing on the edge of survival. John leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His life had just changed, and he knew it. The ad had been for a cook, but what had answered it was not a worker. It was a cry for help. And now, John had a choice to make. Would he risk everything to shelter them, or send them away into the cold night? As the silence stretched, the child looked at him again with wide violet eyes. There was no anger there, no threat, only innocence and trust. And in that moment, John Carter felt his decision settle in his heart. He could not let them go. Whatever came next, he would face it. Because sometimes destiny did not knock politely. Sometimes, it walked in carrying a child, asking only for a chance. And that was how it began. The man who only wanted a cook found himself standing at the doorway of a story far greater. A story of survival, trust, and something he thought he had lost forever. A story of family. John did not sleep well that night. He lay awake in his small room, listening to faint sounds from the kitchen. The alien woman, Lyra, was moving quietly, as if afraid to disturb him. Sometimes he heard the soft cooing of her child, Kale, and sometimes a strange humming, almost like a lullaby, but with tones no human voice should make. It was both haunting and beautiful. John closed his eyes, trying to calm his thoughts. He had fought in wars, faced alien soldiers, seen blood and fire across half the galaxy. But nothing had unsettled him like the sight of a fragile mother and child standing at his door. Why had she come to him? What danger was she running from? He had no answers yet, only questions. Morning came with a pale sun over the plains. John stepped into the kitchen, expecting to find a mess. Instead, he found order. The counters were clean, the pans polished, and a faint smell of cooked food lingered in the air. On the table sat a plate of something unfamiliar, steaming gently. Lyra stood nearby, her silver skin glowing in the morning light, her eyes lowered as if waiting for judgment. John sat down slowly and took a bite. The taste surprised him. It was not earth food, but it was warm, full of flavor, and strangely comforting. He looked up, and for the first time, he saw a small smile on Lyra's face. Kale sat beside her, nibbling on a piece of bread John had left in the pantry. The child's eyes sparkled with quiet joy. John felt something stir in his chest again. This was more than food. It was the first sign of life returning to his empty home. After breakfast, John asked her gently, "Where did you come from?" Lyra hesitated, holding Kale close. From far, very far, our world gone," she whispered. Her voice cracked, and she did not say more. But John saw the pain in her eyes, the kind of pain that only came from loss too heavy to carry. He knew better than to press further. He had his own ghosts, and some wounds never healed. For the next few days, life settled into a strange rhythm. Lyra cleaned, cooked, and cared for Kale. John went about his usual work repairing machines for the colony outpost. When he returned, the house no longer felt empty. There was always a soft voice, a small laugh, or the smell of food waiting. It was unsettling at first, but slowly, he began to like it. But not everyone was blind. The colony was small, and neighbors noticed things quickly. A woman no one recognized going in and out of John's house. A child with strange glowing eyes. Whispers began to spread. One evening, as John walked back from the outpost, he saw two men standing by his fence. They were watching his house, talking in low voices. When they noticed him, they nodded stiffly and walked away, but their eyes carried suspicion. John entered his home and found Lyra holding Kale by the fire. She looked up, sensing his unease. "What wrong?" she asked softly. "People are talking," John replied, sitting heavily on the chair. "They know someone's here, and if the wrong person finds out, they'll come for you." Lyra's face paled, and she hugged Kale tightly. "Please, not go back, not again," she whispered. Tears filled her eyes, and her voice trembled like a fragile string about to snap. John clenched his fists. He did not know why he cared so much, but he could not stand the sight of her fear. He had seen fear before, in soldiers, in refugees, but this was different. This was a mother terrified not for herself, but for her child. And something deep inside him decided. He would not let them be taken. That night, as Kale slept, John and Lyra sat by the dim light. She finally spoke more, her words broken but clear enough. "Our people, hunted, chased from world to world. Kale, last of children, I protect him, always." Her hands shook as she held the edge of her cloak. John listened in silence. He had thought his wars were over, but perhaps destiny had dragged him back into another kind of battle. For the first time in years, John Carter felt he had a purpose again. It was not the war of armies, not the fight of weapons. It was the fight to keep two fragile lives safe in a world that would not accept them. And he knew, even if it meant standing against the colony itself, he would not let them fall. The man who only wanted a cook now found himself at the start of a storm that would test his courage, his loyalty, and the strength of his heart. And outside his window, under the quiet night sky, unseen eyes were already watching, waiting for the moment to strike. Days turned into weeks, and John's house no longer felt like the lonely place it had once been. The sound of Kale's laughter filled the rooms, soft but bright, and even John found himself smiling when he least expected it. Lyra kept her promise. cooking warm meals and cleaning the home as if it had always belonged to her. But beneath the quiet routine, a shadow grew. The colony had noticed too much, and whispers were spreading faster than smoke in dry air. John was careful. He avoided bringing visitors home, avoided long talks with neighbors. But suspicion was hard to hide. More than once, he caught men standing at a distance, watching his windows at night. When he stepped outside, they turned away, but their eyes told him enough. They knew something was different, and in a colony built on fear of the unknown, different was dangerous. Cale, too, was changing. The child was not like human children, and though he tried to play quietly, sometimes strange things happened. One evening, John walked into the living room and froze. Cale was sitting on the floor, humming softly, and the small wooden blocks John had given him were floating in the air, circling like planets around the boy's hands. Lyra rushed in, quickly pulling Cale close and whispering something in their own tongue. The blocks dropped, clattering across the floor. John stared, his soldier instincts flaring with alarm, but at the same time, wonder filled his chest. The child had power, something rare, something dangerous if anyone else saw. Lyra met his eyes, her face pale. "Please, not tell," she begged. John swallowed hard and nodded slowly. He did not fully understand, but he knew one thing. If the colony learned of Cale's gift, they would never let the child live in peace. The next morning, John went to the outpost for work. As he entered the workshop, two men stopped talking the moment they saw him. Their voices had been low, tense, and though they tried to act normal, John caught a few words before silence fell. Strange woman, child with glowing eyes. His blood ran cold. The whispers were no longer just curiosity, they were becoming rumors. And rumors in a colony like this could turn into mobs. That evening, John returned home with a heavy heart. He found Lyra sitting by the fire, brushing Cale's hair as the child drifted to sleep. Her face was tired, her shoulders trembling. She looked up at him, and he could see she already knew. "They watch us, yes?" she said softly. John nodded, lowering himself into the chair across from her. "They're talking, Lyra, it won't stay quiet much longer." She bit her lip, holding Cale closer. "We go if danger," she whispered. But John shook his head, his jaw set. "No. If you leave, you won't survive out there. They'll hunt you. Here at least I can protect you." For a long moment, the room was silent except for the crackle of the fire. Then, slowly, Lyra reached across the table, her trembling hand resting on his. "You risk much," she said, her voice breaking. John looked at her, and in her violet eyes he saw the weight of worlds, the sorrow of a life spent running, and the fragile hope she carried for her child. He tightened his hand gently over hers, a silent promise. But danger was already closer than either of them realized. That night, as John locked the doors and checked the windows, a shadow moved in the distance. A figure stood near the fence, watching the house with cold eyes. He carried no lantern, no tools, only patience. He waited until the lights inside dimmed, then turned away, disappearing into the night. The colony council would hear of this, and soon, John Carter's quiet home would no longer be his own. Inside, Cale stirred in his sleep, murmuring softly in a language John could not understand. The wooden blocks on the shelf rattled faintly, lifting an inch before settling back down. John did not see it, but he felt the storm coming. The man who had asked for nothing more than a cook was now standing on the edge of a secret far greater. And once it was revealed, there would be no turning back. The colony was small, and small places never kept secrets for long. By the end of the week, John could feel the shift in the air whenever he walked into town. Voices hushed when he entered, eyes followed him as he passed, and even old friends gave him short nods instead of their usual greetings. It was not anger yet, but suspicion, and suspicion was always the first spark before fire. At home, life went on as if nothing had changed. Lyra cooked quietly. Cale laughed and played with his blocks, but John noticed her movements were sharper now, quicker, always listening for danger. Every sound outside made her glance toward the window. Every knock at the door made her tense. The peace inside his house was fragile, as if it could break with the wrong breath. One evening, as the sun sank behind the plains, John heard heavy footsteps on the porch. When he opened the door, 3 men stood there, all wearing the badges of the colony council. Their faces were stern, their eyes cold. "Evening, Carter," one said, his voice smooth but sharp. "We've heard talk of strangers in your home." John crossed his arms, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Strangers," he repeated slowly. The man nodded. "You know the rules. Outsiders must be registered, especially if they're not human." The pause was heavy, the meaning clear. John's heart pounded, but his face stayed steady. "There's no one here but me," he lied. The man studied him for a long moment, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Be careful, Carter. This colony doesn't like secrets." Without another word, they turned and walked away, their boots crunching on the dirt road. John closed the door and locked it, his hands shaking. Behind him, Lyra stood pale and silent, Kale clutching her leg. "They know," she whispered, her voice trembling. John nodded, pressing a hand to his forehead. "They suspect, not know, but it's only a matter of time." That night, John made his choice clear. He sat across from Lyra, staring into the flickering fire. "I won't hand you over," he said firmly. "They'll come again, harder, maybe with soldiers, but I'll fight if I have to." Lyra's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as she gripped his arm. "You already risk much," she said, her voice breaking. John shook his head. "Not risk, Lyra. Decision. I'm not letting them take you or Kale." Kale stirred, his violet eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. He looked at John with a trust so pure it cut straight through the man's chest. And John realized he was no longer protecting just strangers. They were becoming something more, something he had not felt in years. A family. But the colony was not blind. The next morning, John found strange marks on his fence, symbols scratched into the wood. Warnings, threats, or maybe both. He stood there in the cold air, fists clenched, knowing the message was clear. They wanted the strangers out, and if he resisted, they would not stay polite for long. Inside, Lyra packed a small bundle of clothes, her face pale. "We should go, before worse comes," she whispered. John stopped her, his voice hard. "If you leave now, they'll catch you before you reach the hills. You're safer here." He placed his hand gently over hers, steady and firm. "I fought wars before. Lyra, I know how to defend a home." That night, John sat awake by the window with his old rifle across his lap. The house was quiet, but outside, shadows moved along the edge of the road. Unseen eyes watching, waiting. The storm was coming, and John Carter knew he was standing at the center of it. The man who had wanted nothing more than a cook was now preparing for war. Not a war of armies, but a war for one fragile mother and her child. And he knew he would not back down, no matter the cost. The days that followed were heavy with silence. John went about his work at the outpost, but he could feel the weight of eyes on him wherever he went. Lyra stayed inside, rarely stepping near the windows, and Kale played only in the quiet safety of the back room. It was as if the house had become a cage, safe but suffocating. Then, one evening, the storm finally broke. John had just returned home when he heard shouting outside. Through the window, he saw lanterns flickering in the dark, a group of men walking toward his house. There were more than a dozen, carrying tools, rifles, and grim faces. They were not hiding their anger anymore. John's stomach tightened. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, his eyes cold as steel. The leader of the group, a broad man with a scar on his cheek, raised his lantern. "Carter," he called, his voice harsh. "We know what you're hiding. We want them out now." John stood tall, the rifle resting against his shoulder. "You've got no proof," he said calmly, though his heart pounded in his chest. The man sneered. "Proof doesn't matter. Everyone's seen enough. Silver skin, glowing eyes. You think you can bring aliens into our colony and keep it quiet?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd, sharp and angry. Behind him, John heard the door creak. Lyra stood in the doorway, Kale clutched in her arms, her violet eyes wide with fear. Gasps rose from the crowd, and the anger deepened into something worse. "She's here," someone hissed. "A child too. It's dangerous." "Abomination," another spat. The words cut like knives. John stepped in front of Lyra, blocking their view. "Enough," he growled. "They're under my protection." The scarred man's face twisted with rage. "You'd betray your own people for them," he shouted. John's voice hardened. "I'm not betraying anyone. I'm protecting a mother and her child, the way any decent human should." For a moment, silence fell, the crowd unsure how to respond. But then someone threw a stone. It struck the wall beside the door with a sharp crack. Cale whimpered, burying his face against Lyra's shoulder. John raised his rifle, the barrel glinting in the lantern light. "One more step, and I shoot," he warned, his voice low and deadly. The crowd wavered, some stepping back, but anger still burned in their eyes. The scarred man spat on the ground. "This isn't over, Carter," he snarled. "The council will hear of this. You can't hide them forever." With that, he turned, and the others followed, their voices fading into the night. John stood there for a long moment, his rifle still raised, until the last of the lantern light vanished. Only then did he lower the weapon, his hands trembling. He turned back to Lyra, who was pale and shaking, her arms tied around Cale. "They'll come again," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. John nodded grimly. "I know, but they'll have to go through me first." That night, after Cale finally fell asleep, John and Lyra sat by the fire, their faces lit by the flickering glow. Lyra's voice was soft, almost broken. "Every world we go, same story, chased, hunted, always running," she said, her eyes on the flames. Her hand rested gently on Cale's hair. "He deserves better." John's jaw clenched. "He will have better, I swear it," he said. His voice carried no hesitation, no doubt, only promise. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, carrying with it the whispers of a colony ready to turn against him. John Carter, the man who only wanted a cook, now stood as the shield between a fragile alien family and the anger of his own people. And he knew the fight was only beginning. The next morning, John's door shook under heavy fists. When he opened it, 2 colony guards stood in the sunlight, their rifles slung across their backs. Between them was a messenger from the council, a thin man with sharp eyes and a voice that carried the weight of law. "Carter," he said coldly, "the council demands your presence now." John knew what it meant. They had wasted no time. The night's events had already reached the ears of power. He glanced back at Lyra, who stood pale in the kitchen doorway, Cale clutching her cloak. "Stay inside," John said quietly, then followed the guards into town. The council chamber was crowded, men and women seated in rows, their faces hard and unwelcoming. At the center table, the head counselor leaned forward, his voice like a blade. "We have tolerated much from you, Carter, but this is too far." John stood tall, his jaw set. "What exactly have I done?" The counselor's eyes narrowed. "You shelter an alien woman and her offspring. You put this colony at risk. We don't know what she carries, what she is capable of, or what danger she brings with her." Murmurs filled the chamber, sharp words rising from the crowd. "Send them away," one man shouted. "They're a threat," another added. John's fists tightened at his sides. "They are not a threat," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the noise. "They are a mother and a child. They came with nothing but fear in their eyes. They've harmed no one, but you want to treat them like enemies." The head counselor slammed his hand on the table. "This colony was built on rules, Carter, rules that keep us safe. Outsiders cannot be trusted, especially their kind." John's eyes flashed. "Their kind," he repeated bitterly. "You mean anyone not human, anyone different? I fought wars for humans who said the same, and I watched innocent lives burn because of it. I won't be part of that again." The room erupted with angry voices, but John did not flinch. The counselor finally raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "Then hear this, Carter," he said coldly. "You have until tomorrow to hand them over. If you refuse, you will be exiled, stripped of your land, and left outside the gates. The choice is yours." The guards escorted him back, though none dared meet his eyes. When John returned home, Lyra was waiting, her face pale with dread. "They want us," she whispered, already knowing the answer. John nodded slowly. "They gave me a choice, give you up, or lose everything." Lyra's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. "You should not suffer for us, Cale and I. We can go. We will run again, please." John knelt before her, his hands firm on her shoulders. "No, Lyra, no more running. I've been a soldier long enough to know when a line must be drawn. This is it. They'll have to take you from my cold hands." Cale peeked out from behind her cloak, his violet eyes wide and glowing faintly in the dim light. For a moment, John felt something powerful in that gaze, not just fear but strength. as if the child carried more than innocence in his small frame. He wondered if the council knew how special Cale was, if that was why they wanted him so badly. That night, John prepared. He cleaned his rifle, checked the locks, and laid extra rounds on the table. Lyra moved silently beside him, helping where she could, though her hands trembled. "Why do this?" she whispered once. "Why fight for us?" John looked at her, his voice steady. "Because for the first time in years, I'm fighting for something worth it." The house grew quiet, the fire burning low. Outside, the wind carried the sound of boots, faint but steady. The colony was already moving, gathering, waiting for dawn. John Carter sat by the window, rifle across his lap, Lyra and Cale asleep beside the fire. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. The man who only wanted a cook was about to face his own people, not as a soldier of war, but as a guardian of two lives that had become his own. And when morning came, the colony would learn just how far John Carter was willing to go. The dawn came cold and heavy. John stood on the porch, rifle in his hands, eyes locked on the figures gathering at the edge of his land. Dozens of colonists, some with torches, some with rifles, their faces grim and unyielding. At the front stood the scarred man and the council guards, their voices sharp in the morning air. "Carter," the leader called, "this is your last chance. Hand over the alien and the child, and we'll let you walk away." John raised his rifle, his voice calm but firm. "No," he said, "you'll have to go through me." The crowd muttered angrily, feet shifting, hands gripping weapons tighter. Behind John, the door creaked, and Lyra stepped out, Cale clinging to her side. Gasps rose from the colonists at the sight of her silver skin glowing in the pale light, and at the child's violet eyes shining like stars. "Look at them," John shouted, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Do they look like monsters to you? Do they look like enemies?" But fear was stronger than reason. The scarred man raised his hand, and the guards stepped forward, rifles aimed. John's heart pounded, his finger brushing the trigger. And then Cale cried out, his small voice trembling but clear. "Stop!" The word was simple, but it carried power. The air trembled, the ground shivered, and every torch flame flickered wildly. The colonists froze as the wooden fence posts groaned and cracked, glowing faintly with energy. Cale's violet eyes blazed, and for the first time, his gift was revealed not in play, but in defense. Lyra gasped, pulling him close, but John stepped forward, his voice strong. "You see now," he shouted, "this child is not a danger. He's a miracle, and if you destroy them, you'll destroy something greater than all of us." The crowd wavered, torn between fear and awe. Some lowered their weapons, others whispered nervously. The scarred man's face twisted with rage. "He's not a miracle, he's a threat," he spat, raising his rifle. Before he could fire, John moved, his own rifle snapping up, his voice like thunder. "Take one more step, and I end this." Silence fell, heavy and sharp. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, one of the colonists lowered his torch, his voice uncertain. "They're just a mother and a boy," he muttered. Another nodded, then another, and the crowd began to break, the anger melting into unease. The scarred man cursed, but when he looked around, he saw no one left willing to follow him. With a snarl, he threw down his rifle and stormed off into the plains. The rest of the colonists drifted away, leaving John, Lyra, and Cale standing alone in the morning light. John lowered his rifle, his breath heavy. Lyra's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as she whispered, "You protect us, always." John looked at her, then at Cale, who clung to his mother but stared at him with trust deeper than words. And in that moment, John Carter understood. He had not just defended strangers, he had chosen his family. The council never tried again. Fear had broken that day, replaced by silence and reluctant acceptance. Whispers still followed John in town, but no one dared challenge him. At home, life slowly returned to peace. Meals at the table, laughter in the rooms, and a warmth John had not felt in years. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the plains, Lyra placed a hand on his arm, her voice soft. "You wanted a cook," she said with a faint smile, "but you found more." John chuckled quietly, his eyes warm. "Yeah," he whispered, "I found a family." Cale looked up at him, eyes glowing faintly in the twilight, and for the first time, John felt not just a protector, but a father. And as the stars lit the sky above Orion. 5. The man who only wanted a cook knew his life would never be empty again.